Okay, nice to see everyone again. We're here today because it is Henry Stewart Creative Operations next week. And of course, we're getting very excited about it. But we thought it'd be a good idea just to try and get ahead of things. We know that the time at Henry Stewart goes incredibly quickly. And I think what we've learned over certainly the last three or four Henry Stewart events is that time seems to evaporate when we're there. So what we thought would be a good idea was to try and bring as many people together as possible ahead of the event, talk about some of the kind of pressing things that we've got top of our minds for Henry Stewart. But also, if you're not going, hopefully the themes that we're going to talk about today will be incredibly resonant. So that's why we're here. For those of you that don't know me or haven't come along to one of the Stock Press webinars before, my name's Ian Parks. I'm one of the co-founders of Stock Press, also the CRO. If you're new to Stock Press, we're a simplified digital asset management platform for teams whose content means business. So whether you call them files, assets, media, or content, to us, they're all kind of the same thing, but we know that there are nuances around it all. We just want to give them a good home in a way that hopefully doesn't cost the earth. So a little bit of the pitch over. I'm delighted to be joined by Angela today. I'm sure many of you know Angela from the great work that she does in the creative operations community. Angela, always great to have you here, and I'll make sure that there's a good opportunity to do your introduction in a second. But while I'm on a roll, I just want to do some housekeeping things before we get going. So the session today, whilst Angela and I are going to talk about some of the themes that are important to us, uh, we want it to be interactive. So if you do have questions or you do have thoughts about, what you're listening out for at Henry Stewart, things that you might want to ask us or get our opinion on the session today, please pop them into the Q&A or put them into the chat. I'll try and keep my eye on both. Not the best multitasker in the world, so I will try my best, but I can't promise anything. We will send the recording out after the session. So if you want to watch anything back or you want to share it out even, it's actually going to be an open on demand this time. So likely put onto something like YouTube. So if you want to watch it again before the event, or like I say, pass it on to anyone else that's going, please feel free to do so. We love feedback on these sessions. Hopefully a few of you have been to the stuff Angela and I have done before. We're all going to be doing more again. And I think what's worked really nicely is actually taking people's suggestions or taking themes that come up from one webinar and actually using it to kind of power the theme for the next one. And yeah, if you're going to put your notes or questions or thoughts into the chat around what you want to listen for at Henry Stewart, we may also try and bring you up onto the screen as well to talk about it. That is not tried and tested. So that might be the intention. We don't know whether it'll work or not. So like I say, drop your questions in, make sure that we're using the chat. But Angela, I'd love for you to give your introduction and welcome everyone yourself.
Thanks, Ian. Happy to be here again chatting with you on all the good topics we chat about. I am Angela Mastandrea. I am a creative operations consultant and coach. I work with in-house, primarily packaging design teams and help them improve the way they operate, the way they communicate, and the way they deliver their design work. So I'm really focused on operational improvement with those teams, as well as coaching leaders on those teams and any kind of people managers on those teams. So happy to be here. Looking forward to the conference. And was just saying before we jumped on that getting out and being able to elbow with those people that are on the teams and my peers is a great way to spend a day, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's like you were saying, I think actually being in a room full of people who are experiencing the same kind of challenges, same opportunities is always, I don't know, it's like reaffirming. It's always reaffirming to go into those events. But I think, like I said, we really want to make sure that we're maxing out the event itself and making sure that, the dialogue is already there and the kind of agenda is already set. So yeah, I think your point is really well taken. Like, great to get together in person. I think we sit in our own rooms at home or our own offices quite a lot now by ourselves, and actually getting a bit of that energy at the event is really exciting. So Angela, let's just dive into a big, juicy question. And that question being, where is creative operations in its growth cycle? Because I know that's something that you're really keen to try and get a sense of at the event.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm curious and will be listening to the presenters and people that I'm having conversations with on what does creative operations or design operations look like in their businesses to try to understand, are these teams and these groups starting to look similar now, because it's still relatively new to have creative operations. It's growing and it's growing quickly. And I feel like things are starting to settle in a little bit. We've been a catch-all for a lot of things for a long time now, but I feel like those definitions are starting to creep up, and I'm just curious if they're getting similar from organization to organization.
Yeah, I mean, are there any spots in particular that you've seen kind of change around creative operations in the last 12? Well, I'm loath to say 12 months because it seems to move like incredibly quickly, and 12 months might, be a little bit of an intangible kind of timeline to work with. So maybe in the last 6 months, have you felt anything change materially, or are you excited about perhaps where creative operations is starting to prove itself to go?
I'm definitely excited about it. I feel like what I'm hearing from those people in the roles on the teams, I feel like they're getting traction as being more strategic partners than being project managers and simply just trying to shuffle the work along. So I think both with their creative partners and cross functional partners, being seen more as somebody who's really going to strategically help them figure out how to get the work done, when it needs to be done, on time, on budget, all the things, and that they're a part of, helping really facilitate things and making it easier for the creatives to do the work and use the talent that they're there to use. So they're not expending that energy in areas of operations that they're not suited for and they don't want to be there, quite frankly.
Yeah.
So I think the appreciation of that partnership and being strategic is definitely growing, and I'm excited to see that. I think that's a really nice place to be.
So I'm going to dig into something that you mentioned halfway through there about excitement. And
Mhm.
it's funny. I think I've shared this before. I get to speak to lots of people across creative operations, creative teams themselves. I feel like there has been a lot of excitement, perhaps for the last 12 months, 18 months, maybe even a little bit longer. And, it's really nice to hear that that excitement is starting to bubble up. I think anecdotally, the conversations that I've had over the last probably 6 to 8 weeks have felt very different. I do think there's been a certain amount of consolidation, and I think we all know how painful that has been for a lot of people. In some respects, it doesn't surprise me that it has happened. I think it's following some wider trends, and one of the trends I'll talk about in a little bit. But I think it's nice to hear that excitement kind of creeping back in. One part of this that I think is going to be interesting in that growth cycle, and I'd love your take on, is how creative operations, unlike the actual, creative part of that process,
Mhm.
so the operational part of this is going to align with the goals of the business. Because I kind of feel like that's where it's starting to get pulled into a little bit more. Whereas I don't know that how much that happened in creative operations in the past. So I'd love,
Yeah.
your take on that.
I think that's where I see that happening through the cross-functional partnerships, right? If you have other parts of the organization that are leaning into you as a partner to creative, so they're seeing how the work that creative operations provides helps facilitate work that is important to the entire organization. So that is absolutely something that I've seen. I've been happy to experience it when I was full time in a role too, and having a COO tell me that the work that our team was doing was impacting the total business. So I think that's something for folks in the space to also be thinking about, thinking broader, thinking bigger, and not just how are we getting the work done, but really how is that helping support total work of the business.
Yeah. Yeah, and, I think I think it's a true demonstration of growth of creative
Yeah,
operations is
agreed.
actually now it is being seen alongside the operational part of the business. And I don't know, I get kind of fascinated by things, especially when things are in flux and especially when things are quite new. And, creative operations has emerged. I think, if you were to say 5 years ago, I'm part of the creative operations team, that would be an incredibly forward thinking kind of organization that really kind of put it into those terms. And I think, in some cases, it feels like operational functions spill down from operations. And actually, I think this is one of those rare scenarios where it hasn't spun out of operations as the overall kind of business
Yeah.
function. I actually think it's formed out of those kind of creative teams, those marketing teams, has become its own operational unit. And I think now, and if they're not, they should be COOs, operations leaders. I think they're either starting to hear about creative operations and the difference that it can make, or they're certainly starting to get more interested. And I'm going to be really interested to hear kind of where this goes in the next 12 months, 18 months around, well, actually, who's measuring what? Because I'm going to say something that might be controversial, maybe not. Feel free to pop it in the chat if you feel like it is. But I don't know that the marketing and creative teams in that kind of true sense of the word should necessarily be the people that are setting the KPIs for a creative operations team. You
Right.
know, I would much rather, in my mind, have the operations leaders in a business set the KPIs for creative operations teams because actually then they're going to get the credit they deserve. So I think alignment of goals and alignment of KPIs and who sets those KPIs and almost who owns creative operations, which I think is going to be up for discussion in like, the coming period of time, I think is all very interesting in terms of like what things I want to be watching out.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that. When I'm listening to you talk, I think creative operations was born out of a need within a creative team. So to your point, it didn't start. And I see this happening across, there seems to be an ops team for almost every division of a company now. So it's an interesting kind of thing that's going on. And I feel like it will be interesting to see how at some point, if all of these operations teams wind up bubbling up to the operational lead in a business. I don't know. We'll see. I think it might take a little while to get there, but definitely as far as KPIs, creative is can be an interesting area to try to track and measure the value of. So I think having some support in that area would be fantastic
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
people that do that work, and that's the target. So how is the work they're doing in relationship to the creatives to hit business goals?
Yeah. I think I've definitely shared this before. I think any marketing team that doesn't have a marketing analyst is probably not a complete marketing team. I also think the same is likely to be said about creative operations and creative teams in the next, in the coming period of time, as well as that, that creative analyst role that is really able to kind of dive into what's the impact, what's the outcome. And I've shared it before, I'll share it again. How do you take
Mhm.
creative out the cost center and put it into the profit center? Because most of creative is now generating like a large part of the sales. It's in my mind, and I've shared this before, creative is almost like it's a new sales team because, so much of it is leading to inbound. So much of your sales now as an organization is going to be inbound led. Yet, do creative get the credit for it? Well, it's hard to get the credit if it's not being measured. So, yeah, I think that iteration on things is going to be, yeah, kind of fascinating. So,
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that. I think what is needed is the difference in the partnerships that happen within an organization. Those cross-functional partnerships and who's getting credit or who's not getting credit, it's going to come out of those, organizations who figure out how to build the relationships cross-functionally to really work as a greater team.
yeah. And it's funny, like the credit thing has always been something that I hark back to kind of when I used to play team sports.
Uh-huh.
Like, I do have a fundamental belief that if you don't care who takes the credit, then you're in a really good position.
Yeah.
equally though, if there's no credit to be given, like that's when it's a problem. So
Yeah.
I'd love to see that kind of emergence of the data around creative, because I do think it kind of plays into the growth cycle. So I think one of the other things that I think is probably important to think about, and that is going to be something I'm going to be listening out for pretty heavily, is it's something that I guess I refer to as the talent cloud. I guess it would be aligned with like how businesses are becoming more agile. I love it. It's dressed up business speak, or
Yeah.
we're going to move budgets around and we're going to get creative with what does headcount look like versus what does contractor, like, the
Hmm.
agency freelance look like. Fundamentally, it's going to change. And, I think there's been a whole heap of change in the last 12 months, as we all know. And I think so much of that, unfortunately, does not come down to how many people are needed in a creative team to be able to run it effectively. It's just, what does that team like from a budget perspective on a spreadsheet on someone's
Hmm.
desk, completely disconnected to it. So I'm going to be listening out for that, because I think materially it changes the way that people need to work. I think materially having, more freelance and agency staff working alongside a core of the business naturally presents its own challenges. I don't necessarily think, as people and teams, we've worked out quite how to get the most out of those relationships so far. I think we sometimes underestimate that like inherent knowledge that exists when you're internal to a business. The stuff you hear every day, that kind of the way you take on the brand standards, the way you care about what you do. And I'm not saying that, if you're on the agency and freelance side of the house that you don't care about what you do. It's just that the model is delivery. And the more time you spend doing something, the overage that you might put into it, the margin goes down. And agencies don't like that. Freelancers certainly don't like that. So I think there are some tensions there around the people side of things. And I also probably believe there are some tensions around the technology side of things, just because I think probably legacy approach to how technology is built for is not built for this blend of people inside the business and people
Hmm.
outside the business. So I think, I'm really interested to hear how this is impacting people at the moment, because like I say, I think there's budgetary pressures that are perhaps dressed up as, in slightly different ways. And I think it's about like creative thinking almost to understand what the team needs to look like. Don't know what your take is on that, but it feels important, because I think that's the big transition. It's like perhaps been most important as people go.
Yeah. I actually think it's a huge opportunity for creative ops teams and folks, right? To help facilitate and manage the effective working relationships with these external partners and kind of being the gatekeepers to keep things on track, right? If you've got, and I have had probably too many conversations the past year about, exactly what you're saying. Teams are getting smaller, they're starting to outsource. And it's ironic to me because 10 years ago, I was at a place where I was bringing the entire thing in-house, so I feel like there's a little bit of that. It's just how the companies are managing their budgets. You're absolutely right. So I think for ops in this case, to really position themselves and show the value they have of being efficient in how that work gets facilitated. I do think from a tech standpoint, it's still a challenge. I have clients that have been working with external partners, and the internal team can be working in these systems and they haven't figured out yet how to let those external partners in, which just causes the internal teams to have to do extra work. So hopefully that the tech stacks are going to come along, and the, I guess, more security and safety from organization standpoints to make sure that they can have their external partners who are very integral to the day-to-day business be, you know, able to use those tools as well.
Yeah. I can feel my inner geek bubbling up right now. I'd be, but genuinely, I'd be really interested to see like graph plotted in terms of whether it was like, the state of the economy versus, internal versus external teams.
Yeah.
and see what that correlation looks like. Because again, if it is like fluffing up the budget and making it look slightly different, internal versus external headcount, I'm sure there'd be a really interesting correlation. And you could probably tie it into things like the type of technology that's used. I went to a really fascinating talk about, and it's going slightly off on a tangent, but how some of the tech investors are now judging when to buy into SaaS and when to invest in SaaS. And they basically do it off AWS profits and AWS usage, because there's some weird thing about when AWS release their usage and profit report, and it's like a month ahead of when the SaaS companies release their profit and like normal reports. And
Sounds like insider
uh,
trading.
well, this is the funny thing is like when they start to see those numbers go up,
Yeah.
then you can assume that actually all the SaaS companies are doing better. But, again, I think to a degree, whilst it might not, all of these things, I guess the point I'm bringing it back to is all these trends exist. And for us as an industry, those trends are the things that we do need to start looking at, because actually, if we know that we can start to track trends according to what we think is going to happen versus getting to the point and almost like the budget cuts becoming being a bit of a surprise.
Right.
And I think, a lot of this feels like it landed on those teams rather than people being able to get ahead of it because they kind of saw where things were coming from. And again, I don't know whether that feels great, but I think as an industry, it's perhaps something that and let's go back to Henry Stewart here. The point of that event is to get everyone in the same room. There is a massive amount of knowledge in that room, and there's a massive amount of like people that are seeing things going on in real time. And again, conversation starters, like thinking about how we start to predict trends around staffing and, the makeup of creative teams. I think it's really important that we get that. Yeah, just seeing in the chat there,
Right.
it's valuable to a business because, like I say, a lot of so much business is being driven by these teams. So really important to get on top of and be able to expand, contract in the right way at the right time so that it's valuable to the business. So I know that was more kind of industry theme side. The other part of creative operations that is always fascinating is based around the tech side of things. So maybe if we can just dive into the tech side of things for a few minutes as well. I know there's some stuff that's top of your mind around
Mhm.
like and the way that people are approaching technology in the space. So if do you want to share kind of what's top of your mind, what you're going to be watching out for?
Yeah. I mean, there's no shortage of tools, right, to be using. And I think businesses and teams are challenged with what does their tech stack look like? How many different tools are they using? And so for me, I'm curious how these organizations are really navigating that intersection of people and tools. So adoption and picking the right tools. And, along with the talent and this, you know, people needing to be good at their job, we're all now also responsible for being good at these tools. And I think there's sometimes a gap, often a gap within companies when they're implementing tools. They forget to budget for a person that's a subject matter expert that the rest of the organization can go to. Typically, it falls on your IT team who may be good at IT, but isn't necessarily, you know, they're not subject matter experts on all these different tools. And I'm sure that's something that you guys talk about at Stock Press, Ian, is how do you make sure that people in the organizations are set up to really effectively use the tools that they have? Because if they're not being used, then they're not useful if they're not being used. So
And
that's definitely one of the things from a tech standpoint that's on my mind.
yeah, the dynamic of that is wild. And, hopefully it kind of loosens up. But yeah, I suppose the way just to lift the lid on that and how we think about it is we see it as champions and then, financial buyers. Very rarely, especially in big organizations, do the two meet. The financial buyer of a platform is often not the person that is the person that's actually using it. And, that creates friction. It creates a bit of a disconnect. Also the motivations for buying things are very different. if you're the person in the tool day to day, you're going to pick the best tool for the job. I think, sometimes at proper exec level, you pick the tool that's not going to get you sacked. And I think, I think that's where sometimes that disconnect exists. So I think, we want to try and spend a lot of time focusing on those champions, because I think those champions are the people that then need to be able to take this back into the business, talk about talk about buying tools in a way that the sponsors will understand. And again, I don't necessarily think that, a lot of businesses out there help that communication. So yeah, I think that like the buying side and the procurement side, especially when there are so many options out there, are like really interesting. Can I just congratulate us as well that we went
Yeah, of course.
27 minutes on a webinar in 2024 without mentioning AI. I genuinely
Well, that
think
one's going to be next,
uh,
though.
we deserve some sort medal for that. Go on then.
Yeah. So obviously, that is another thing that I'm definitely my ears are open. I've been looking at the agenda. We'll get to that part later and seeing that there's more sessions that are going to include conversations around AI. And for me, I'm curious what people are using, and also really curious if it's the creative operations folks that are being kind of tasked to lead these initiatives, or is anybody in the organization being tasked literally with this initiative? How is AI going to help support our business? And, where the training and the learning and getting up to speed, is it people just, like I'm trying it on my own, like figuring out how can it work for me? It's moving so fast. How our business is getting behind it in a way that helps support teams that need to be using it
Yeah.
or will benefit from using it for sure.
And I think it may have even been one of the creative operations events at the end of, it may have been London. I can't remember, but that was something like 80% of people in an organization have tried an AI tool or used an AI tool themselves independently of the business. And I think this is where the rubber will start to hit the road with it is, businesses are now going to have to be much more aware of what's being used, because again, like there's so many aspects of it that come down to like ownership through AI. I know OpenAI this morning or yesterday have come out and talked about the fact that, there's still question marks around the ownership of the content that is being produced through OpenAI.
Right.
I think that's where businesses need to get incredibly aware and incredibly like switched on to actually what's being used to put these things together.
Oh,
And I
I'm
think,
sure their IP departments, intellectual property departments are like,
yeah,
they've got their work cut out for them for sure.
yeah. And I think it's almost like we might get into a situation with AI of like, hurry up and wait, where
Mhm.
everyone's wants to use it. Everyone is probably using it without permission to use it. And it feels like, there might be a bit of a pullback on it just until that like legal aspect kind of gets sorted out. But I think the one thing that it feels like, and, to your point, you're exploring these tools, you're trying to kind of use them for yourself. I think through the 12 months of Henry Stewart creative operations events last year, that really kind of resonated with me was the first one that I went to, I think was LA,
Mhm.
and everyone was talking about AI's coming. There was a lot of fear around it and it was going to take jobs. I think by London, the sentiment was, yeah, I've started to use it. And in many respects, if I don't learn how to use it, I'm probably going to get left behind.
Right.
So I think, it feels like the creative industries have embraced it. And I think, the tangible use of AI in the creative industries is perhaps further ahead than a lot of other industries anyway. But yeah, I think the sentiment of you've got to embrace it to a degree, whether you like it or not is a different thing, but understanding how to use it. And again, understanding what things that we do day in, day out that are kind of commoditized assets that probably have a good place for use with AI, that open up the space for us to get better at creative because we've got more time and we've got more,
Right.
more energy to explore other things. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what that sentiment is around AI. But like I say, I don't think, it's not independent of just technology in general.
Yeah, like, Alyssa's, question in the Q&A too. She'll have a question about how about AI and how senior leadership is endorsing or supporting that transition to a certain AI tool or tech stack. So we'll be listening for that too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a big point. I think I, al- I'm worried that it kind of goes back a little bit to the conversation we had before about who's buying the tools in the first place. And, I spotted the note in there about, and again, from Alyssa, that element of creative ops procurement and creative ops being a part of that procurement process. But I also would extend that to creatives being part of that process. Like, what I would hate to happen is that AI is taken off into this little bubble of executive leadership and they're deciding what they're going to use without it actually spilling down. Or actually, in my case, it's pushing from the people that need to be able to use it and really understand what boots on the ground are saying about like what's valuable and what's not. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see whether it's top down or bottom up. And I'm kind of fearful that it might be a top down approach.
Yeah.
I told you I was terrible at multitasking. I'm trying to read everything in the chat and then my brain basically is just the sound of my own heartbeat. So I'm going to have a little look through those
Yeah,
whilst,
there's a couple good comments in the
yeah,
chat.
yeah, I agree. I think it is that element. It's exploratory. It's not the end of the line yet. We're so far from the end of the line. And I also think a lot of it comes back to consumer appetite. Like, what do consumers want to see now? And, that's the bit that we can't second guess. Like, how long did we spend producing like incredibly produced assets, video assets that were like polished to within an inch of their life, only to realize that people wanted like real short format, shot on an iPhone content because it brought people closer to what's actually happening. I just don't know we've got even scratched the surface yet of like what's needed, let alone what we're all capable of.
Yeah, I
Um,
think also, Ian, this AI obviously is gonna have some wonderful benefits. It's gonna have its challenges, but I think what I struggle with is right now, I feel like it's become another thing that people on teams are kind of tasked with figuring out while they have to keep, you know, the plane flying. It's like nobody's giving them extra time to figure this
yeah,
all out, but they're expected to use it. And that makes it challenging, especially when everybody, the companies want, more work, fewer people, less cost, and oh, now figure out this too, because that's going to help us to
yeah,
do those things. But again, are the resources there to have the right focus on it so that
yeah,
it can really be beneficial?
yeah. No, I agree. And I think your point is really well made. I think not just about AI. We've done 7 minutes on AI. That's plenty. But, I think again, it's like across the board. Are people given enough time to really think about the task in hand?
Yeah.
And, again, I think there's so much of this at the moment. We're being asked to do more with less. And actually, it's not just about like delivery, it's about thinking. That
And
ability to be able to step out for a little bit and get your head straight and get your thoughts in the right order. We all know that it's that element of, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. What never happens is unless you give people the time or and I think we're having to get more kind of cognizant at the moment to actually tell people that thinking about things is still work. Like
yeah.
just because you might not be tapping a keyboard or like drawing something, like thinking is work. And we're just terrible at thinking that like that is not, that time out to think about things. We all, and the worst part of it is I think probably a lot of people feel guilty when they do.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's bizarre. That's the most important facet we've got is the ability to think back to the challenge. So,
Because
so
we've
again,
been trained to be machines,
yeah,
right? So,
yeah. So I think hopefully, again, these tools are designed to help us day to day, but I think the onus of us as people is to make sure that we're giving people the space to be good at what they do. And, so often we're brought in for that knowledge and that thought process that we can bring to things. And unless we give that chance to breathe, then, you're missing a big part of what people are about. So we might have the best AI tools in the world, but, I think we'll start to realize that unless you can be quite cerebral about what you're asking AI to do, the product's not going to be great, and it'll just be a dumbing down exercise. And I don't think that's what we should be thinking about. I think from my perspective on technology, and I'm going to keep this really quick, I'm just looking out for adoption, and it's adoption from two perspectives. Number one is how long it takes to stand something up, because I think what I'm constantly hearing at the moment is this element of it takes 3 to 6 months to maybe even 12 months to stand up a piece of technology. And unfortunately, businesses change really quickly. People don't have the attention span. And I think, a lack of adoption really is coming down to the implementation time for some of these things that we're meant to be using in the first place. I think an element of what I kind of talk about a lot and what I'm looking to kind of listen to at the event is, how can you be better at something next week than you were the week before? Not how can we be better at something in 6 months' time or 12 months' time? Because the whole team might have changed, like the appetite for what you're doing might have gone. You might not even get to the point where you stand it up because you might have thrown your toys out pram with actually with the tool itself. Very rarely is it the tool's fault.
Yeah.
It's just
I've seen
people.
it happen.
Yeah. So, I feel like there is an onus on us in the technology industry to ensure that if a product is good and can be valuable, that actually it should be reflected in the time it takes people to get to value. So I think that's what I'm going to be listening out for as well, is actually, where is there a big pushback at the moment on adoption? Because again, people are going to have to justify spend on tools. And if not, those tools aren't being used, then you've got to really think about well, where is the value in them? So definitely keen to try and listen out for a ton of stuff around that. I am mindful of time. And the one thing that we haven't touched upon is how to get the most out of the event. So I'd love to spend, 5-10 minutes as we start to look towards wrapping up on what can we do at the event to make it really, really worthwhile? Because it's going to be great anyway, but there are levels of great and we can make it really, really good. So yeah,
Agreed.
thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you my 5 tips for getting the most out of this event or any event, really. And first is I have Boys and Scouts. So their motto is be prepared. And I will use that here because you have an opportunity before even going to the event to really look at the agenda, see which topics you're most interested in, things you're curious about, and maybe want to ask questions. You're going to look at the speakers, who's speaking, what are they speaking about, what's interesting about them. Is there an opportunity to meet them? And sometimes enlist somebody to go with you. If you struggle with these events, enlist somebody to go with you. Meet people ahead of time that you know are going. I think that's Ian and I met in person first time at this event last year or the year before. I'm trying to remember now.
And wildly. Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
New York. Yep. Then I would say the second thing is to go with intention. So really decide, what is your goal going to the event? Is it to meet peers? Is it to meet mentors? Is it to learn something new from the topics that are being discussed? Doesn't matter what it is, whatever's important to you, just think about it ahead of time and be intentional about what you want to get out of it. I actually was reading or listening to, I think, a podcast and the woman was saying that she goes to an event and challenges herself to meet 3 to 5 people and take selfie photos and post about the event using them. So being that specific about what they want to get out of the event.
Yeah.
And number 3 is don't just stand there. Network. That's what you're there for. If you're just going, I mean, you can just go and listen to the talks and whatnot, but you are definitely not making the most out of the event if you are not, being brave. I think Ian has a little note on that too,
Yeah.
but walk up to people, say hi. I love my trick is in the food line. making a comment to somebody else who's standing there about the desserts or what it is, or
Just steal an olive off their plate. That's a great way to start a
that
conversation.
I won't do, but I'll let you do that one, Ian. But anyway, to try to just start conversations, and it can be hard. It can really be hard, especially when, as Ian, you and I were talking before getting on the call, and we know a lot of people there now. So to get just to say hi to the people that we already know, let alone, taking our time to also meet new people and network, really important as well. Come with a question or an intro line that you can, start with just to start a conversation. And
Yeah,
hopefully if you do know somebody there, they know somebody that, they can introduce you, anyway but network, talk to people. You got to talk. Don't just stand there. Two more things, which really are post event. Don't just leave the event and have it be that and don't do anything with it. Really take a look back, do a little hindsight. Maybe you're going as a member of a team and not everybody gets to go. Are you bringing stuff back and whatever you're learning to the team? So you're giving additional people insight and sharing. And then the last is to follow up with people that you meet. I mean, connecting on LinkedIn, having conversations, just saying, "Hey, it was nice to meet you. Would love to stay in touch." That goes a long way and it just leaves the door open for future conversations. And I don't know if anybody knows, but LinkedIn has this cool little like QR code bar on you just click on it and it's easy to scan and like connect with somebody right there real time and then do follow-ups. We
yeah.
have very easy ways to do that nowadays. So those
Yeah.
are my 5 steps.
Well,
5
I agree with all of them. I think the thing that is really important, where I had to stand out most important,
Yes,
I'll probably be wearing this exact outfit for the event. No, like genuinely, it's silly little things like, do make a difference.
definitely.
The big thing with that as well is like, before you walk into the room, acknowledge that everyone is there for the same reason. Like, it's not like this is just a random group of people that's been thrown together to, to go to the event. It's, we're all there as people in the industry. Guess what? Like, most of the themes that we talk about at the event or are going to be talked about at the event are things that we talk about in our own businesses every day. It's
Yeah,
just, this is our opportunity to go to the event and like acknowledge that actually we're not the only people with that challenge. And like I always talk about this, I get to aggregate knowledge. So I get to have conversations with different people from different teams. And they all think their team is the only team with that problem.
yeah.
And then I'll go to another call with another business and they're like, yeah, I've just come off a call where I was talking about the same thing. Like, this is a chance to like open up and empathize with other people that understand the challenge. So that naturally should be a blocker to, worrying about going up to people. And listen, I know different people have like a different like attitude, different, mindset about going to these events. But I think it's really important to remember that everyone is there for the same reason. But, it is important to put your brave pants on and actually walk up to people and introduce yourself. And, we all know what it's like. As soon as you introduce yourself, people are pretty good at
Yeah.
starting a conversation, especially when we all kind of know what each other does and knows what we kind of there for. Counter to that, and I think it's the one thing that we're all probably a little bit guilty of when we go to these events sometimes, is you just want to go there and talk. And actually, I always try and be very mindful of just going to listen. You know, listening to a conversation or, listening to the talkers and, standing next to someone that's talking to someone on one of the booths, like, can be really powerful because, you're taking yourself out of the moment and actually, again, like, suppose comprehending some of the things that might be a challenge to you and also might be a challenge to someone else. And actually, that's a great way to start a conversation. Oh, it's just, I hope you don't mind. I was just listening into what you were talking about. And actually, it's like, it's the most powerful thing you can do at any event or anything in general.
I
Mhm.
love that, Ian, because I feel like that's an easier way. If you're going to an event and you feel subconscious or concerned, like you don't know how to go up and like you don't know what to say to somebody,
Yeah.
you don't have to know what to say because people want you to ask questions,
Yeah.
So if you ask a question, then that'll be followed up by something that will give you something to respond to.
Yeah.
And it's that listening skill I think is often
Hopefully
underrated.
there's so many little visual cues as well. Like if it's a busy room and someone stood on their phone, it's because really they want to be talking to someone, but they might not have, the confidence to go up and actually start a conversation yourself, like themselves. And I think that's a really important one. It's like you're probably not going to bother them from doing work. It's just that it's become a crutch. So, even spotting that kind of in that busy room moment, just getting in there and doing it is great. But I think the point of this wasn't necessarily to kind of give everyone tips on like how to network. It was more about that notion that, we're all going to be there next week, or, even if you're not there next week, there's still ways to engage in it. And it's a room full of people that are trying to share knowledge and come together for the good of the industry. So it's really important to, yeah, have those conversations, ask some difficult questions of each other because everyone's probably going to be in the same boat. And to Angela's point is not just leave the event as you walk out the door. But I think the strength of an event often is how long can we keep the conversation going for afterwards, and
Yeah.
how keep those connections going, because that's the bit that drives the industry. So, I think it's really important we acknowledge that and make sure that we get there. So I know we're pretty much at time. Thanks for getting that chat going. Some really, really good stuff in there. Simon, thanks as always. I know you're dialing in from the UK, which is it's great because it's the end of the day there. Hopefully you've
Yeah.
got a beer, which will make this a whole heap easier anyway. And Angela, it's always a pleasure to do these with you, but incredibly excited to actually see you in person next week.
Next
Um,
week.
yeah, so
Likewise, Ian.
really, really excited. So, Angela, if anyone wants to get in touch ahead of the event, what's the best way for them to do that?
Look me up, mastandreagroup.com. Find me on LinkedIn, Angela Mastandrea. And I also hold a monthly Let's Talk shop to have these conversations about what's happening in people's creative operations world and share insights. It's not just me talking, as you know, Ian, because you come as well, but it's really sharing. The group shares and people bring problems and we help problem solve together. So it's a good way, another good way to connect and network, and would love to have you guys all there as well.
Yeah, and do go along. I can vouch for it. It's great. And I think that the beauty of the way you've got that group set up now is it is definitely professionally focused, but I think it's broken down a lot of boundaries and barriers in there now. And, I went to the first one. Oh, I went to one and didn't know anyone on the call. And actually now I go along to it, and actually it feels like a group of friends that are able to get together. It's just that it's bound by that common connection. So yeah, make sure you get along to that and get the details on it. I'll wrap up with, if anyone needs any help with their content management ecosystem, do get in touch. We are trying to do something different around digital asset management. It's probably a space that's not been looked at for a long time. We are trying to simplify it because it shouldn't be rocket science. It shouldn't be stupidly costly. And we genuinely love understanding kind of your businesses and how you operate. So yeah, please get in touch, Ian@stoppress.co. If we're not connected on LinkedIn already, do get in touch. But yeah, for those going to Henry Stewart next week, really look forward to seeing you there. Let's make sure we connect when we're in the room. If you're not going to it, watch out for all the content that will be coming out because there'll be some great stuff flying around. So yeah, looking forward to next week. Always love being part of the industry. I think it's going to be an exciting time. And I think probably for the first time in a while, we can say that and probably believe it. So yeah. All right. Thanks again, Angela. And yeah, see
Thank
everyone
you.
hopefully next week. Take care.